The following is my conversation with Kena Shree. Kena Shree is a poet, a storyteller, and a blogger. She and I explore her love for poetry and the impact poetry has on a societal wide level, among several other things like her appreciation for atheism, yet still appreciating the beauty that's there in the world, which was fascinating to unpick. Um, as a side note, let me just say that I feel that poetry, among several of the other artistic disciplines, um, almost depict the meaning that is there or give meaning to the mundane things that we may have not otherwise taken into consideration while we go ahead with our lives. I just find it so beautiful because otherwise people wouldn't just stop and take notice of the little things that make up their days. And I think it's those things that actually have a lot more impact because cumulatively it's just more time that you spend doing the little things than perhaps going for a vacation with your family or those sorts of things, which is great as well. So anyhow, I hope you do enjoy the conversation. And yeah, here it is. Hey, Kena Shree, welcome to the All Walks of Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is all mine, Ishan. I'm so glad to be here.
So, I mean, it's really interesting to have this conversation with you because I've really been looking forward to it. But just a little bit for the viewers and the listeners, if you could give a brief about what you do, and yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, what do I do? I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none, so I never usually have a good definition which would count. But as succinctly as possible, I'm a writer and a storyteller. And other than that, for bread and butter, I work with Government of India as Deputy General Manager in a Maharatna company.
Okay, so that's fascinating stuff. I mean, I'd like to explore this whole your writing, blogging, and storytelling aspect to your side. So, I mean, this is a question I've really been wanting to ask my guests who've been coming on the podcast, and I haven't done so as of yet. But I guess you could be the first one. So this was something I picked off from another podcast I heard, and it's that if you could be a fly on the room and listen into a conversation of three intellectuals, who would they be? And you could pick these intellectuals from the past, present, or they could be fictional characters as well. So let me know who these three people are.
You're all set to put me under spotlight today. I really
mean,
hope it gets released. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I'm going to disappoint all my friends and the near ones around with the stupid answers that I give. But then you've got me absolutely spot on. So all right, three people. One would be, okay, let me be a bit cheesy. I think it would be Lady Diana Hayden Spencer. I think I have been smitten with her and the beautiful story that runs behind her romance, her love life, her philanthropy. And probably because I got to know her got to know her personality when I was growing up as a kid. So obviously this fascination still holds on. So one would easily be her. And I would like to see what she would be talking with Prince Charles and, the people who loved her, so on and so forth. It would be easily Einstein. I wish I could get a chance to get into his laboratory, his own zone, and see how geniuses work. Geniuses have fascinated me. Prodigies have fascinated me. And the third would be I would love to be a part of Shakespeare's theatrical troupe and maybe dance along.
Yeah.
A jester would also do. I would be happy becoming a jester in his troupe and do nothing and loiter around. But to be around him would be really, really great.
Okay, let me throw a controversial question then. Do you feel Shakespeare was one person, or do you think Shakespeare was a group of writers then?
Group of writers, easily.
Really?
He was like 100 faces into one. Come on.
Yeah. And you say that with certainty? Have you looked through that?
Actually speaking, no. But if you ask from a fan's perspective, I would never see Shakespeare as a single person alone. He was like 100 minds rolled into one. But factually, I don't know. What do you think, Ishan?
I mean, I see it's always fascinated me as well. But I don't know. Don't you feel that maybe an individual can possibly explore so many different aspects to his literature? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that could happen, right? Like we know Tolstoy was one person, and he wrote War and Peace. And like War and Peace is such a magnificent piece of literature that it just encompasses so many things. But I don't know. Maybe it's. I mean, it does it even matter? I guess it doesn't matter to know if it's one person or not. I guess it's a frivolous question.
All that matters is, would I ever get a chance to be a part of the troupe? I mean, can
Mhm.
you take me back to the timeline and put me there for once, please?
No, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, that was all fun and games. But I came across this blog of yours on the Times of India, and I'd like to quote something from it, where you mentioned open quotes: "The Buddha is everywhere, except perhaps for our hearts." So, what do you think these spiritual figures, these mythological individuals that we look up to, represent? Do you feel that it almost matters that they were individual beings in the past, and that helps us possibly orient ourselves in the future? Or do you feel that it doesn't almost matter, even if it's a fictional character, let's say, or a mythological character? That's all well and good if it helps us orient ourselves in the life. So perhaps you could answer that, and maybe you could tell me a little bit about what your thinking was when writing that particular article. Again, like my questions are very multi-layered, so I'm sorry for that.
I mean, I totally get your question. I know where it stems from. See, mythological characters for me, the characters do not matter at all. If it was Buddha or it was anybody else, would not matter the least. The philosophy matters. The philosophy behind what he says, the thoughts that he has propounded, the views that he has left behind for us would matter. So for me, the philosopher is not as important as his philosophy. So that is one thing. So Buddhism stays for me. The tenets of Buddhism, the tenets of humanism stays for me. Essentially, I am an atheist, so I do not follow any religion. I'm a complete atheist, and it took me a long time. I dwindled between being agnostic and being atheist for a long, long number of years before I eventually embarked on becoming a complete atheist. So I do not identify myself with any religion or any spiritual leader or a religious leader at all. However, philosophy does. I mean, philosophy is fascinating. And I think tenets of Buddhism are most simply read and understandable.
Mhm.
So that's how I got attracted to the philosophy of Buddhism. And I like that. And so goes with other religions as well. So goes with other philosophical leaders as well. I don't think the leaders matter, their thoughts matter, and that is it. And the reason why I picked up this thought for writing, was that it is very ironical that we talk about Buddha so much. We embellish Buddha in our homes. We keep our surroundings decorated with Buddhism icons, but we fail to bring Buddha inside our heart. And when I say Buddha, I do not mean Buddhism per se, the religion. What I mean is the thought of humanity, the thought of love, compassion, affection, the thought of forgiveness, kindness. I mean, until all those beautiful values get inside us, why are we even talking about it?
Yeah. No, and this is something that you pointedly mention in the piece. You say that, yes, I know it's fashionable to have Buddha cushion covers, but don't you want him and his teachings in your life as well? So, I mean, that's just so poignant, and it's just so relevant to what you're mentioning here as well. I recently visited with Ladakh, and something I've come across, and in my limited understanding of Buddhism and, let's say, Buddha's teachings, is that he never embarked having a religion as such. Like, he never mentioned that you make these statues of me, you worship me, you do this, you do that. I'm From my limited understanding, it was simply just be your own individual, and act however much from your own logical understanding of the world and how you perceive it, among other things. Like, I've recently completed Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha as well, which is a beautiful piece as well, which really talks a lot about this aspect. So, but I mean, just circling on to this point of atheism as well, because I just find it so fascinating. I wouldn't say I would label myself in any bracket as such as of yet, probably still agnostic in that sense. But don't you feel that these ideas that you find so interesting, let's say philosophy or the teachings of Buddha, in itself possibly hint at something transcendental, something that is to be aimed at, something that one should possibly strive towards, and that in itself shows you that there's something deeper than just meat and bones.
That's correct. I mean, that is truly that's pretty correct. But the deeper I started reading the texts of religion and spirituality, I began moving further away from it. And I do not know how it happened. It was very, very organic. So the more I tried to understand the layers of religious manuscripts, it drifted me away from it. And somehow, at one point of time, I started reading No God Theory. I started reading Sam Harris and Richard
Oh
Dawkins.
God.
And then I was caught up between the two, because as much as I was allured towards philosophies like Buddhism or any religion for that matter, I was also reading scientific proofs and scientific newer concepts of there is no God. And between the two, I dwindled for a long time. And I realized that whenever I would talk about religion, I would not dismiss it completely. I would always be open to picking up the goodness than picking up the godliness.
Mhm.
So godliness does not exist for me. Goodness does, and it will always, always do. So I could see goodness in you, and you could become my God.
Yeah.
So this is how I see religion. And therefore, I found myself more at peace, more at comfort, and more taking ownership of the situations. The more I went away from the theory of God, the more I began taking ownership of my own actions. And I could make sense out of that layered puzzle. It is far easier for me. I mean, the only religion that I believe in is humanism. And if any religion is cornering around that, it is good for me.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Like I've gone through my own rabbit hole of Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, but sadly I fall more in the school of Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you've heard his name. A little more controversial, perhaps. But anyhow, I mean, there's something else I wanted to touch base on, which links in this particular article as well, and some of the other things you've put up on your YouTube and other social media handles as well, where it talks about lifestyle among other things. So again, I'm quoting from your article, so where you mentioned there is no path to happiness, happiness is the path in some sense. um and again, like, my question here is, why do you think we're so attached to material possessions, material things in the world, and we're constantly chasing one thing after the other? And sometimes it's frivolously, where we don't even know what what what's its purpose in our life, or if it's going to add value to our life. I think value is the right word here, because I recently spoke to this minimalist coach as well, and she said that what minimalism is about isn't as much as going into the forest and living a life of a samana or something of that sort, but it's actually about maximalism. It's about maximizing the things you find valuable.
Yes,
is
exactly. So
Am I talking sense?
yes, that's so beautifully put. I would, whenever I would initiate a conversation around minimalism, the first question that would come to me: "Oh, you've stopped buying a car. Have you emptied your wardrobe? All right. Do you have very less clothes? Is your house almost like an empty closet now? Oh God, no! Please." Like you said, minimalism is actually maximalism, and it's sort of an exploration into opportunities of finding pieces that would give you intense happiness and peace. It's just that. So if your happiness comes around collecting pieces of makeup, do that, but understand that you're doing that. The point is to drift away from the mad rush in which uh, you don't even take stock of the situation. You don't even know why are you heading towards the destination, and in some cases you do not even know the destination itself.
Yeah.
That is the entire point. You know where you're going, how fast or how slow you're going. You know where you are supposed to take a halt, and halt there. Take a pause, take a break, understand yourself, relish it. And I think it becomes more tasteful. It makes all the more sense. And automatically, happiness, like butterflies, it comes to you and sits on your shoulder. And then you realize it's there. And the moment you begin to chase it again, it'll go farther and farther away. So I think the key point in adopting minimalism is to take a halt and understand your own value system and what do you want from life. As simple as that. It's actually very simple. Let's even not complicate it.
Yeah, as Tolstoy said, if you want to be happy, just be happy. No, no, but I mean, it's all easier said than done, to be honest. But how do you feel that individuals can possibly walk this path of minimalism? Like, what are some steps that they can possibly take in understanding of possibly decluttering the things that think they may be adding not as much value to their lives, and are possibly just distractions in the actual thing that they want to achieve? And is the goal that they want to achieve, like, what's the process? Do they have to sit with themselves and actually think about what they want to get done in their life? Like, how did you come across, what was your journey of minimalism?
I decided to halt. I was in a mad rush also. And then, one doesn't even know why at all this chase. Why at all? I mean, just because everybody else is doing it, am I doing it for the sake of doing? Or do I really want to do this? So I decided to take a hold and just think it over. And then I realized I actually took a very conscious decision of adopting minimalism. I mean, I had read about it, I had heard about it, and I really wanted to see, is there a thing called the concept of minimalism? Does it really work? And a couple of conscious steps that I took for myself, it worked like magic.
Okay.
Yeah, it really worked like magic. I remember at one point of time, I was very obsessed with, uh, because I was very fond of reading, I was obsessed with books. I was surrounded with hundreds of books at the same time, and I was not reading all of it simultaneously. And I did not want to give it away also. I did not know how to handle the kind of knowledge I was surrounded with, and I was surrounded by it in abundance. For me, that itself was a clutter. It was an intellectual clutter which I wanted to get rid of. So I sat down and I decided, one at a time, let me just sort this out. And that was also the time I realized that I, in person, am very, very, very pathetic with multitasking. So I cannot do 10 things at the same time, which other people may be very deft at. So you may be good at, probably gymming and reading and watching a movie at the same time. I am not that sort of person. If I do all of it at the same time, I would lose interest and I would not be able to extract the most out of each activity. Similarly, when I was decided, I wanted to decide what at all, if even if I want to read, what is it that I want to read, and why is it that I want to read? And then suddenly, I could see the clutter in front of me. I could identify pieces that I wanted to give away, gift away, put it aside, lock it in a closet for a later period. And then I realized that I was reading much faster than what I was when I was surrounded with 100 books at the same time.
Mhm.
And similarly with other things also, be it clothes, be it your friends. There's no point in having 100 friends and not being able to interact meaningfully with any one of them.
Mhm.
So I realized that I need to sort my life. This is way too ugly and life is fleeting by. Suddenly there would come one point when life would be half gone and I would not even have figured it out by then. What is the point? So yes, I think the approach to minimalism for me, which worked, was to take a halt and take very, very conscious decisions. And journaling also helped me a lot because I think for me it went side by side. So I would keep writing. I would write my thoughts, journal my thoughts, journal my journey of minimalism, what I lost, what I gained, and I realized that I gained more than what I lost. So it was beautiful. It was beautiful, but it was very conscious. It did not come to me like an accident.
So do you feel like journaling in some sense, because writing your thoughts down like really helped you think through them in some sense? Because like if you just sit down to think, it may be very difficult, but when you're actually writing things out, you're actually seeing like the flaws in your thinking, or maybe understanding that why you're constructing things together, and then it just fits in better. I don't know, like some people talk about writing as a meta form of thinking almost, because when you're thinking, there's so many thoughts in your head, but when you sit down to write, you sort of channel them into something that you can, I don't know, make use of later, like a diary, a journal entry, or something of that sort. And that possibly just helps out. Yeah. I don't know where I'm
I've
getting to with
been
this.
journaling forever. I think as far as I can remember, I can imagine my I have imagined myself with a piece of pen and paper.
Mhm.
And for me, it has been my diary, my journals have been my go-to place of sorting myself. So yes, if you say that your thinking transcends in the form of writing, it does. So yes, it's very therapeutic actually. There's so many things that you do not want to discuss with others, and
Mhm.
you yourself know the answer, but all you need to do is to sit down, get hold of it, and then rethink it, revamp
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
review it, and the answer is right in front of you.
I mean, something which is also very closely linked to, let's say, writing in that sense is poetry, I guess. I mean, obviously, it's one form of writing. So, can you speak a little bit about the magic that is the medium of poetry and what it allows that possibly other mediums don't allow? Because you're a great poet yourself. Like, I mean, I've listened to many of your poems online. And yeah, so can you speak a little bit about that? Just the medium in general, and then maybe we can talk about some technicalities.
I'm always a reader first and a writer later. So I read a lot of poetries, and reading poetry has come more therapeutically to me than writing poetry. So even still, I read a lot of books and I read a lot of poetry. I love poetry. And I think it's a beautiful medium because there are so many things that can be very subtly and beautifully and aesthetically expressed in words, which probably one would not be able to do if one were to write an essay. So I think poetry is one such medium which is very profound, and it stirs up the inner emotions, which is very important when it comes to conversing with yourself or conversing with anybody else. If you're able to string the chords of emotions in other people, obviously there's magic going to happen. And I think poetry does exactly that. It sometimes gets you to get angry. It sometimes gets you cathartic. Sometimes it liberates you, and sometimes it just touches you like a soft feather.
Mm-hmm.
So it has various shades to it. It's just wordplay, and wordplay is magic. We all know that. So that's why I think poetry is extremely comes like a therapy to those who need.
But why do you say perhaps it's, let's say, it has much more of a connect than an essay or a book or something of that sort? Do you think it's about the finitude? Like, because there is, in some sense, there is still something you're catering to in terms of how many stanza, how many verses, how many stanzas it can cater to, how many lines per stanza. So even though there is a chaos in the wordplay, there is still some order to it, and it's still, let's say, easy to grasp onto, perhaps because it's much shorter. Like, why do you think it is, like, as compared to other mediums?
Okay, let me give you try and giving you an example. See, if I were to tell you that moon is a satellite of Earth, I can actually give you a long scientific essay on it and
Mm-hmm.
still not be able to convince you how beautiful and romantic moon can be. But just a verse on moon and no scientific explanation. Probably I can let you know the power of romance by just describing moon. Essays fail sometimes, but aesthetically put in words never fail. Or if I were to tell you that a rose is a set of petals and sepals put together, it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
It will still qualify as an essay, but it would never qualify as a girl's heart.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, I just sort of want to connect this back to atheism in some sense.
Okay.
I'll try finding a tangent. So, I mean, don't you feel if one is an atheist, and I'm not particularly pointing at you in this particular aspect, but just in general, let's say, if one is an atheist, and if that individual looks at the world as a scientific realist and says that everything is just materials, and then why is the point of anything, right? But as you pointed out, don't you feel that the manner in which we sort of portray things, of making, even if, like, for example, this glass of water which is in on my desk right now, as you can say, I can describe it as an orange glass which has some water in it, like, I don't know, 500 ml or something of that sort. But maybe I can say this well sculpted glass that's on my table, which is on looking me, where I have this conversation with Kena Shree, doesn't that almost make it more real than the glass itself? And that's why so many of the people who are in the religious faiths and who talk about, let's say, these scriptures, mention that there's a reason why none of the scriptures have mentioned any of, let's say, truths in a very numerical manner, because they feel that numbers cannot be translated or numbers cannot be acted upon. It's poetry, it's verses, it's songs, it's hymns that can be acted upon, because those almost translate over eons. Like, it's very Yuval Noah Harari, like, to say that, like, everything is just stories, and like that's what we sort of connect to. So even when Krishna is talking to Arjuna, like, it's in a manner that, even though there is some crux to the things he's saying, if it's said in a very lyrical manner, maybe that makes it almost easier to connect to over the years to come.
That's
Is there any sense? Am I making any sense to the thing I'm talking about?
History is a testimony to the fact that all religions have actually propounded on the premise of art
Yeah.
through paintings, through verses, through poetry, through sonnets, through mantras, through chants. All of this is lyrical play of words, because lyrical play of words bring about a human connect, which essays never would, data never would. So religion, they're very, I mean, I would not use that word, but they're pretty smart. You know how,
I mean, there's a reason they've sort of lasted for so many years, right?
and it will
Yeah.
still go on because
Yeah.
there is no end to human emotions, and they
Yeah.
know how to, you know, sometimes towards advantage or towards disadvantage, they know how to play it on.
Hmm. I mean, it is in some sense like art can be like, I don't know if religion is the right word to use here, but like maybe it's the it's science versus science and the arts, perhaps. And like I don't know, maybe like it doesn't have to be religious, but I feel that the greatest of art pieces as well is inherently religious. And what I mean by that is if you see like a great piece of art, you're just awestruck by it. And it's not even like you feel, it's not like you're even conscious at that time. It's almost like you're in possession of that particular work of art. And that in some sense, I don't want to sound preachy or something, but that in some sense does talk very similarly to like a religious like if someone has like a religious experience or something of that sort. That's why music is so meaningful to so many people and why they're so connected to it, isn't it?
Yes,
Because yeah, it's maybe they just hit the chords right.
yes. That's our eureka moment.
Yeah.
Not for this podcast.
I mean, there's so much to poetry though. Like, and something I really like in your YouTube videos as well, and many of the places where you have performed is almost this aspect of the way it's recited, the poetries are recited, and the art to that as well. Because there is one thing of just going on the stage and reading from a sheet of paper, and there's a totally different art form when you're almost, as you mentioned, the emotion to how you're performing it. Can you speak a little bit about that, and yeah, what's the philosophy behind that?
I think there are very different forms of poetry. There some of the poetries which exist in a written form, only in written form, and have not been performed so far are as much beautiful because it belongs to a different category altogether. But the kind of poetry that I do is usually performative poetry. And even out of the performative poetry, if you go through the stuff that I've created, I think most of it is protest poetry. So whenever it is a protest or whenever it is a performative poetry, obviously the recital or the narrations take certain prominence over the writing. So it becomes, or if not over the writing, it becomes as prominent as the writing,
Yeah.
because only then it would come across. However, I still insist, and I still would like to believe that written pieces are as much powerful, sometimes more provocative than performance poetries. But the kind of poetry that I do is slightly different. It is spoken word. It has a theatrical touch to it, probably because of the fact because I stem from theater. I have been a part of theater groups since childhood, so I understand stage. I love stage. Let me not even say I understand it, because even the greatest of artists would never understand stage fully. But I'm just trying to learn the love for stage is still there. So I'm trying to learn the nuances through performance poetry. So that's how my pieces would always have more recital, more narration, and a live connect with the audience. I would love to have instant reactions, which is unlike poetries written for
Yeah.
books or for
Yeah.
print media, because you never get live reactions. Some of the poetry, which some of the poems that you find in say books, uh, these get reactions much later.
Mhm.
They have been few pieces by say Majaz, or say by very very senior legends who have gained prominence posthumously. So I don't know, but with performance poetry, it is right there. The moment you recite, you know whether the connect has been made or the disconnect has done the damage. So you know it's right there. And because I belong to the theater fraternity, I'm used to it. I like people around me. I like taking instant reactions, and I like embracing the connect there and then, for good
Mhm.
or for bad. अगर वो टमाटर भी फेंकेंगे, it's good for me. All right,
Yeah.
because I like to be in touch with the moment, in the moment.
I guess there's a good and bad to everything. I mean, just something I could gather from like listening to you talk right now in the distinction between the written form and let's say having it be recited. Do you feel that having it be recited when you're performing on a stage and there's a crowd that's on looking you? So, in some sense, because if there's one individual who starts applauding or who starts reacting in a certain manner, that could possibly trickle down to how the others react, even though that may not be how they perceive the poetry in some sense. Whereas if you're actually simply reading the poetry at home in your comfort, or what have you may have a totally different perception to it. Like you may totally read it differently to how person X may read it, like in some other city, right? And simply because you aren't in connection to them in the same physical space. Because I know some performers have spoken about this, stand-up comedians, musicians, and all those sorts of things, that it's like the chaos of crowds almost. Like people, if there's one individual who sort of acts in a certain manner, people just follow on. Have you found that to happen, like, or is it distinct even in a crowd?
It's always orchestrated. So, so, it works like an orchestra. I think it's correct. There is the chaos of the crowd that is there, but for the performer, it is good because it adds to the rhythm of performance. So, for good or for bad, suddenly there is this synergy that gets built, not the energy, the synergy. When so many units come together, it makes the performance even bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So, if the same performance was to be read alone, probably that energy would transmit, but the synergy would never be created. So I think
Yeah.
for synergy to be created, you need slight chaos in the crowd. And you're correct when you say that there is something called a mob mentality, which
Mm-hmm.
which does transpire there. It is
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for perhaps me and other younger poets? Like I have written a bit of poetry, but just for other poets as well who possibly aspiring to write more poetry. Like, what are some tips that you could possibly share? You mentioned about you read a lot of poetry, and that possibly helped you write poetry for yourself. But are there any other such tips that you could share?
That's quite difficult because I'm still learning. I still myself am figuring the art of writing poetry, and I'm not even half as good as it. But what helped me, I can tell you what really worked for me. One was, of course, reading. Uh, the other two was getting out of the loop of hesitation. I mean, as budding writers, as budding creators, most of us get caught in the loop of reluctance and hesitation, and we take a long time before we put our piece across to the public. And the knack of perfection also. I think we need to get rid of the knack of perfection. We keep perfecting our art and questioning it, self-doubting it. Sometimes it is so long that it leads to procrastination. So it would be really great if you share your work right away
Mm-hmm.
without the fear of getting judged. I mean, that's one thing that, and I see Gen Z doing it compared to us, the millennials. We were little more hesitant in showcasing our work. The Gen Z, they're very smart. They do it right away. And look, it works for them. So by the time we are creating a poetry and working and reworking on it, they would have posted like 10 other pieces and probably jumped onto the 11th one, which is, it's okay. I mean, you never know which out of the 10, it's like quantity over quality also works.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is also a brilliant concept which I understood in life much later. So even right now, I'm working on a novel which it's my debut novel, and I've been sitting over it for last 4 years because I have not been able to gather courage to pitch it before the publisher. I always think it's not done beautifully, it's not done enough,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know whether it's worth it or not. Um, so sometimes it's like have you read about this experiment in which this entire class was divided into two groups, and one group was given the task of making one pot collectively, pottery, and they were given a period of 7 days a week, and the other group was asked to make as many pots as they could, and only the number would count at the end of the week. So
Mm-hmm.
after 1 week, guess what happened? Which group do you think did a better job?
The one that had one pot for 1 week.
Actually, that's sort of the trap that I was in, because this group that was working on a single pot for 1 week actually made a pot which was just good enough, but the other group, just by the virtue of making hundreds of pots in that 1 week, kept perfecting their pottery skills after each pot.
Yeah.
By the end of 1 week, they ended up making the last piece of pot, which was uh, comparatively less flawed,
Okay.
but they had learned their mistakes.
Yeah.
People learn mistakes they've done, perfecting the art. And now this group sat over making one pot for a long, long time. So at the end of the day, I mean, this is the experiment. This is a psychological experiment that has been done and proven that sometimes,
Hmm.
especially when you're honing your skills, quality takes a backseat and quantity, helps you learn the art. So if you were to write 10 poetry pieces, probably the 11th one would be better than your first one. But if you
Hmm.
would sit on a poetry for a long period of time, perfecting your art and thinking how best could I, put it across, then probably it's just a wastage of time. And I learned it the hard way. I have actually done that. I've not wasted. I would not use the word wasted because it's either win or learn. It's never a thing called lose. So, but it took a long time to learn that I will have to get the courage to showcase my work, even if it is half done, even if it is imperfect, even if it is flawed. And that's the only way I can climb up the steps. I cannot be standing on one step and waiting till eternity for the next step to be the perfect one.
Hmm.
I think this is another tip that worked for me, and it might work for some of the aspiring writers. Learn to showcase your work without hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a writer, journalist who I really look up to, Amit Varma. He has a podcast as well. So he says that perfection and productivity are like sides of like the same coin. Like they're almost opposites in some sense, because you almost have to put your work out there for it to be critiqued, and then that can help you sort of understand, like to perfect your art, and that's it, to perfect your craft. So I mean, again, coming back to this whole tips for younger writers and those sorts of things, often with poetry coming into it, there is so much freedom to it. Do you feel that freedom in itself can also be not liberating, but also in some sense not give you any structure, which would in some sense, as you're saying, like not be in like not be conducive in actually putting some words on paper, because you're like where to start or like how to do it, because anything can work and everything can work.
Art is very amorphous. If you're talking strictly about literature, then perhaps it would have rules. But other than that, if you talk about art in general, it is very amorphous. What is art to you may not be art to me. What is art to
Hmm.
me may not sound art for you. I know where this thought is stemming from, because I have been there. All of us have talked about it. And okay, let me be very raw and
Like, I mean, an 800-word poem is as beautiful as a 150-word poem or something of that sort. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and some may be in a quartet where they're like four lines per stanza, but some may not.
putting couple of words. Okay, let me put it. If you put certain number of words together in any form and call it a poetry, is it still a poetry? Does it
Hmm.
qualify to be a poetry in literature? Is the big question, right? Because again, we are giving you enough freedom. You're liberating yourself by putting those words. There are certain words which are put haphazardly here and there, and it does qualify to become a piece of art, right? You're an artist also. Now, everything said and done, the big question is it really contributing to the field of literature and art? The answer would be no. But having said that, because art has a very amorphous structure, it would still not dismiss you as an artist. You would still
Mhm.
remain an artist. Your art may not be the perfect art out there. It may need improvement, but it will still be a piece of art. It may not be the perfect piece for literature. It may not
Hmm.
be the perfect piece for art, but it will still be some form of art needing perfection. Getting my point?
Again, like, I don't know, and I'm not obviously as well versed with the field as you are, but then do you feel that it's can we even use like the word perfection when it comes to art? Like, in some sense, that's expression, right? And expression can be anything. So
Yes.
even if it's simple words on paper that someone scribbled down, that, however we may see it, is expression, and that may be just as is, can be just how the individual wants to sort of express himself or herself, and that should be all right. Like, I think so.
That is
The way
all
I'm
right.
coming on. Yeah.
That is absolutely, that's what I'm saying. That it's okay. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay.
Hmm.
And it's okay and still not okay. See,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you were to consult the the stalwarts in the field,
Mhm.
probably they would not accept this piece as an art piece. They would look for rules.
Hmm.
But the point is, somebody would have broken the rule of rhyme for it to qualify as a free verse, and you could be that somebody.
Yeah.
And that is where our art gets its ground from. One needs to break the rules of literature and break the rules of art to find newer concepts of art.
Hmm.
And therefore, whatever creation that you're doing is all right. It could be different, but it cannot be dismissed off just because it does not follow a set of rules.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was coming to. Yeah. I mean, you've recited quite a few poems in Hindi, English, and Urdu. Like, this is something that really intrigues me. Is like the different languages and how they come together. Because I feel that so I'm bilingual, so I can speak English and Hindi quite well. Like, I feel that there are some concepts which I think in English, and then if I try thinking about the same concepts in Hindi, I may come to different conclusions in both of them, which is like beautiful, really. And there are and like my question here is because there's so many, we're talking about religious texts as well. Like, if you translate a particular text, even if it's from like Sanskrit to Hindi, there is just so much that is lost in in what it was trying to put forward. Even if we may think we have the meaning down, I don't think that's true, because perhaps the meaning is, as I was saying, in like there's a word in Sanskrit called rasas, which means like it possibly in the manner in which it's constructed, that's the meaning in it, like the lyrical style to it. So my question here is, like, reciting it in these different languages, what have you come to learn, like the interplay between languages, also how different languages, like how different poets write in different languages and those sorts of things.
I can, I'm good with Hindi,
Mm-hmm.
English, and little bit of Urdu.
Yeah.
So, and I find the approach almost the same in every language. I mean, the approach towards art and creation is almost the same in all of the languages. But of course, when it comes to translation of work, half the emotion gets lost somewhere. No matter how much would you try, it does. So I tried writing poetry in English, and I realized that probably when it comes to protest poetries, I can protest better in Hindi, and therefore I can Hindi pieces when it comes to uh, instant protest poetries. It comes easier to me, effortlessly to me. Um, uh, where were we? I mean, what were we talking
we were
about? I just lost track.
we were talking about this aspect of different languages and translations, and maybe understanding poetry in different languages. Like, I pointed out that you have recited in English, Hindi, and Urdu. So, like, what were some things that you possibly learned from reciting it in those languages?
See, Hindi is very dear to me. Like I told you, it comes effortlessly to me, and I have composed most of my protest poetries in Hindi. When
Mm-hmm.
it comes to English poetry, it and what? I mean, it sounds good, yeah. What are we talking about, and why are we talking about it? I mean,
Really?
if very simply put, if you translate a work from one language to another, it is going to lose a good part of emotions. That's something which is given.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but as far as the approach is concerned, it is the same. I mean,
do you
I
feel do you feel there's more of a loss when it comes to translations in poems as compared to, let's say, books or essays? Because in some sense, in books and essays, there is more substance that is there to the meaning and what the writer is trying to convey, whereas in poetry perhaps there's a lot more emphasis on the artistic value. That's not to say that all poets are the same way. Maybe there are some who value, let's say, meaning much more. But is that the reason as well? Because in poetry, in some sense, you require that particular rhythmicity, which will be difficult if you then translate it.
yes, sort of, because at the end of the day, it is wordplay, and
Yeah.
the choice of word plays a very important role in creation of poetry that the poet has consciously, very consciously made.
Hmm.
So, if you're going to do away with those words, what are the best possible substitutes? And do you have those substitutes in the language that you are talking about when it comes to translations? For
Yeah.
instance, if I were to say if I had a Hindi poetry line which says, "Aaj mera man udas hai." What is the best possible word in English for man?
Heart,
No,
soul,
it is dil.
dil. Acha.
See, even if you
Mind. Is it mind? I don't
no,
know.
if mind is mind, then what is dimag? What brain?
Acha.
I don't know. See, you get my point. There's so
Yeah.
it would never have a close translation. And when you feel at loss of words, the emotion gets dissolved. You would never come to anything which is as close as man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes sense. um. I mean.
That is a very funny example, though. But I had no other way to
No,
explain.
but it conveys the point nonetheless. Um, you are a voracious reader. Are there some, like, first of all, like, what do you think reading allows? Because you said you're a reader first and a writer second. In some sense, what do you think reading allows individuals to do? In some sense, because do you feel it takes them to another place, another experience that maybe they couldn't have experienced in their life, living in the confines of their home, their room?
And take up different roles. So even if you won't find Heathcliff in your real life, if for once you did date him while you were reading the novel. So
Yeah.
it helps you to understand characters and get into the skin of the character.
But do you feel it almost then helps you approach it in your life? I guess this is more prevalent with fiction than non-fiction too, but fiction in some sense, because if you're, as you're saying, if you're embodying a particular character that a writer has presented, you're living that life. You're sort of seeing the actions he takes or she takes, or and those sorts of things. And do you feel that almost helps you orient your life then? That's what great literature does, right? Like, in some sense, you then start applying those methods in your own life and see how far you go. Yeah.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Are there some recommendations you could throw possibly my way, and for the listeners as well? Some books that have really influenced the way you look at the world or simply enjoyed?
Oh, there's so many. That like could be a long listicle. But obviously, my all-time favorite go-to book is Wuthering Heights for a couple of reasons. That I read it when I was very young, and things that you read when you're very young tends to get imprinted and etched on mind like no other. So I read it when I must be like 15 or 16 years of age. And I love the linguistic ability of the book. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. The context is beautiful. The characters in the book are very beautiful. The very strong characters. And I don't know, there's something about the Bronte sisters, I think. Like Emily and Charlotte and all of them, they're different. They actually transport you to a world where probably you would, in flesh and blood, you would never be able to visit. So that's one thing about the Bronze Sisters books. Wuthering Heights is number one. I also like Fountainhead, though I do not like the theory of objectivism much.
Okay, so yeah.
But I still like the.
Ayn Rand, yeah.
It set a cult. It set a cult. It set philosophies. It broke stereotypes. But I really like the book. Another book that I like is very simple, which is a sort of a novella. That's Old Man and the Sea.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that I like about it, that it's just the entire book is around one instance, just one instance, his sea voyage, and that's it. And one can bring hundreds of emotions out of that one lone night that he spent there in the waters. So I love that book also. Which else? And so many others.
Yeah.
If you talk about Hindi, I think all of Premchand's stories, collection of short stories, are amazing. Rabindranath Tagore, oh my God. I mean, yes. Manto, if you have read stories from Manto, I think another world altogether.
Yeah. No, fascinating stuff. Listen, Kena Shree, this has been a really interesting conversation. I know you could only spare me an hour today. Hopefully, we can have this conversation sometime in the future. If there's something you'd like to leave for the listeners, possibly where they can find your work, your social media handles, feel free.
Ishan, it was lovely talking to you. I do not know. I don't think I've talked like this with anyone in a long time. Uh, it was sort of a freewheeling chat.
Yeah.
Where did we start from? Where did we go? What all we talked about? If I were to think about
It's like one of your poems.
and I would not be surprised if half our viewers would, put the video off in between and dismiss it as one of the
Yeah.
most boring interviews. Never mind. We had a good time. I had a really good time talking. And honestly, Ishan, the kind of points that you touched upon, I had no clue of it. It was, it felt like we are sitting over a cup of coffee and just chatting frivolous things, not so frivolously.
Yeah.
So
I
it
mean,
was
as I like to say, it's my podcast is about everything and nothing at the same time. So
That's so correct. That's so correct. So I love being here. Thank you very, very much. And I really hope we get together
in
someday,
person, yeah,
our, the mutual convenient time, and then take the talk forward. There's so many things that I would love to talk about with you. So yes, until next time, I'm available on LinkedIn. If you want to discuss HR, human resource, leadership, management, communication, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you could find my videos on YouTube. I have my own channel which runs by the name of Kena Shree. And I also work for stories for Taper Tale and Spill Poetry. So my videos are put up there also. Other than that, Instagram and Facebook is always there. I'm just a message away. Just drop me a message. And I make it a point to uh, get in touch with all of the messages that I get, most of it at least.
yeah. That's lovely. Okay, thanks again for this one and wasting so much time with me. Hope we can do this sometime again in the future. Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.